Do you want to understand what the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are? Then listen to this entire video. So, why am I personally interested in the Four Noble Truths? Well, I first came across them when I was researching on the suffering of life and what it means, where it stems from, why we suffer, and I stumbled across the first noble truth, which is directly linked to suffering. And then I did some more investigation in what the first noble truth is and stumbled on the remaining three, which is the set of Four Noble Truths. Now, Four Noble Truths sort of indicates that they are the fundamental, perhaps, foundations of the entire religion, which I think is the case. I'm not quite sure, but I think so. That Buddhism is predicated on these four statements, or these four arguments, let's say. And I will explain them now, and why it's relevant is because they set up the process of alleviating suffering. They're the first step, and they are more to do with the acknowledgement of suffering, and then they follow on to the actual step-by-step how to alleviate suffering. So let's dive in. Noble truth number one, the first noble truth, is all life involves suffering. Now, wow, that's a strong statement for the first noble truth. What it means is that humans suffer. They endure pain. They are subjected to pain. Why? Well, one could explain it like this. So, we live in a infinite environment, the universe. It is infinitely complex, infinitely dynamic, and constantly changing. However, we are humans, a limited being placed in this infinite environment. So we have an infinite pressure placed on a finite being, and that's how the suffering comes to manifest itself. Because let's say it's like this. I have this metaphor. Let's say you build a house. Well, then a storm comes and blows your house down, so you have to rebuild it. But then another storm comes and blows it down. Now you have to rebuild it with less resources and you have less energy. And then another storm comes. You get the gist. The universe has no problem with sending you an infinite number of storms, but you do not have an infinite amount of resources or energy to rebuild your house. And that's quite frightening. So it's like this also. You can strive for an prestigious career in medicine, in research, in consulting, whatever it is, but you're still going to die in the end, and what you created will eventually be forgotten. That's quite frightening. It's a realization of your inadequacy in the universe, and that's quite difficult to realize because it looks like we are the center of the universe, but really we are quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and that's frightening, and that's anxiety-inducing, and is, I think, the source of suffering. It's the limited nature of our being. You'll experience injury, disease, death. You know, these are all attributes of our finite being. Okay. And what this indicates is you'll never be able to permanently be happy. You will have ups and downs, and for a section of your life, in aggregate terms, will be painful. It's part of it. Okay, the second noble truth is suffering arises from attachment to desires. So, the cause of suffering is the desire to have control and influence over things such as cravings or sensual desires. For example, if you desire fame, fortune, recognition, etc., etc., you set yourself up to suffering, because you will surely, to a degree, disappoint yourself. You're measuring yourself on bad scales or suboptimal scales, and you're attaching yourself to material things, and you're sort of projecting yourself onto outside objects, which is not a good idea, because everything outside of you won't be there forever. even in the span of your time to a degree. Like the likelihood of something being there for the whole time is quite low. So you set yourself up to losing the possession of external objects, whether it's people also, and that will hurt you. That's suffering. That's painful. And it's a consequence of you projecting yourself on the outside world. And then noble truth number 3 is suffering ceases when the attachment to desires ceases also. So when you stop projecting yourself and attaching your ego, yourself, to external objects, that's when the suffering ceases to exist. And that's also the state of nirvana in terms of Buddhist terminology. And it's a state of freedom, liberation, and non-attachment. It's letting go of desires and cravings, and also letting go of worries, anxiety, and I believe also fears. And I think this is also connected to the state of enlightenment. It's the absence of suffering. It's sort of the antidote to it. And then the 4th noble truth, which is leading on to something else, says that freedom from suffering is possible by practicing the eightfold path. So this then leads on to a new set of 8 guidelines, perhaps one could say, to actually act out the alleviation of the suffering, or the step-by-step how to alleviate it. And it's the path of enlightenment. And it's to summarize it, it's 8 steps of self-improvement. You give up certain things and you focus on improving, progressing yourself. Yeah, so it's very internal focused, the eightfold path, and that I will do my next video on what the eightfold path is and how to follow it, let's say. So these were the 4 noble truths. All life involves suffering. Suffering stems from desires and attachments. The 3rd noble truth is suffering ceases to exist when you cease your desires and attachments. And then the 4th noble truth is you achieve enlightenment or nirvana by following the eightfold path, which I will do in the next video. So this is just sort of the little bit of the deduction of suffering in Buddhism. It's like life of suffering. Suffering stems from desires. Suffering is alleviated when you get rid of the desires, and then you do that by the eightfold path. And what I have a very nice quote is like, in Buddhism, I believe one is taught like the desire is to desire nothing, and that's it basically. You know, roughly speaking, it's you desire to desire nothing, because when you desire something, you want something, and then you're stressed about not having it, because you're missing. You have a void that you're missing. But if you don't desire anything, there is no void, because you don't have an urge for something. It's a very spiritual outlook and theoretical, because I don't think I have my own doubts about it, whether it's right, whether it's desirable. Because if you desire nothing, does that mean that you don't create an output anymore in your life? Or maybe you still, like I was thinking, like if you don't desire anything, then do you become idle? Do you become idle in that you don't do anything anymore? But I think it's not that. I think you still do, but you don't desire, you don't want something, you just do it because you enjoy it, I think. But then you also do it, but do you desire to enjoy it? And that's why you do something? Complex. I'm not quite sure. One would have to deduce that or try and figure that out. Maybe you can think for it for yourself. So that was my video on the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening.